I'd like to welcome everyone to Blue Ridge PRISM's fall meeting. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Rowena Zimmerman, and I'm the Director of Communications and Outreach for PRISM. I've got with me the PRISM staff, Lauren Taylor, Natalie Walker, and Joseph Edel, who will be here helping with any of the Q&A questions that you might have about invasive plants or just management or anything like that, that you can go ahead and type into the Q&A tab, which I'll talk about in just a second. I just want to give everyone a chance to log in since it's just at 11:30. But anyway, welcome. If you have any audio issues, we do have the closed captioning enabled, so you can just tap the option at the bottom of your screen or wherever you've got your tabs and click it on, and it should turn on for you so you can read along with us. Another option is making sure that your Zoom audio is connected correctly. So in our webinars, what we like to do is if you just have kind of random information, not random, but useful information you like to share with us, or just like I asked you now to share with us where you're joining us from, we'd ask that you put that in the chat. If you have questions, though, about the that you want us to answer, then please go ahead and add that to the Q&A so the staff can take a look at that and make sure that you get your questions answered and help you with things like that. So comments and information you'd like to share, please put in chat, and then questions that you have, please put in the Q&A tab. I want to just point out a couple of things that are coming up for us in the next few weeks. We've got our online fall/winter webinars that are really, really useful tools to help you get through the autumn and winter months, to know how to identify invasive plants and what they look like at this point of the year, and also how to control them. On this slide, I've got the information combined, but these are two different webinars. On October 22nd is identification from 1 to 3 p.m. And October 23rd, it's management and control from 1 to 3 p.m. And you can take both, or you can take one or the other, whatever works for you. And more information is on our website for you to sign up. For those who would love to join us in person, we would love to have you. And on October 25th at McIntyre Park in Charlottesville, that will be a in-person workshop where you'll get to walk with us in the woods to identify in person some of the invasive plants that you see there, and also get more of a hands-on approach to being able to see how to best manage them and control them, and see what the materials and the tools look like. That's a really fun day. So if you can join us, we'd love to have you. Again, information is on our website. So now I'd like to cede the floor to Rod Walker, who's our president of Blue Ridge PRISM, just so he can give you a short update about what PRISM's been up to and happenings around the invasive species world. Rod?
Hey, thank you, Rowena. I appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. Good morning. I'm just going to provide a short update on what the PRISM has been doing and will be doing. A lot of our work this year was related to the 3-day workshop that we held in December of last year. We had 80 people there representing almost 80 different organizations from across the entire state. We focused on how should we be approaching invasive plant problems, and the result was what we now refer to as the Virginia Invasive Plant Coalition. And a lot of the things we've been doing this last year are a result of that that 3-day workshop and the work streams that resulted from it. So there was a whole series of work streams. And if you want to read about each of those work streams and what it all consists of, there's a new website at virginiainvasives.org, one word, and virginiainvasives.org. But in addition to that, we've done a variety of other things. We've been providing statewide training for groups like the Master Gardeners or the Virginia United Land Trust, the conservation districts, and some of the master naturalist programs. We've been working on a new app to help with invasive plant ID and control, so stay tuned for that. Internally, we've created a 3-year strategy for going to the General Assembly for if you will, assistance in laws and regulations and funding for various different things, including improvements on removing invasive plants from the retail trade, trying to get some cost-sharing programs, incentive programs put in place for property owners, and also providing financial support to the key state agencies that are tasked with the mitigation of invasive plants. We also worked with the Virginia Conservation Network, which is a group of over 150 different conservation organizations. They've agreed this year to include a focus on invasive plant legislation in their common agenda briefing book. So that was a major step forward. We've also been supporting a great new organization up in Loudoun County, the Loudoun Invasive Removal Alliance, LIRA, to help them, particularly with regard to removing a tree of heaven, but as well as other activities there. This is a group that represents something like 53 different homeowners associations that covers over 250,000 residents in Loudoun County, which is just a fabulous undertaking. And there's another one similar to it, I understand, being put together in Fairfax. We're also working with at least one new prospective PRISM, as well as working with the Department of Forestry to help them find other people around the state who would like to form a new PRISM. So if any of you happen to be interested in forming a PRISM similar to the Blue Ridge PRISM in your area, by all means, let us know and we'll be happy to help. We're also supporting an undertaking to create the first statewide retail garden center survey. This is to understand who is selling which of the listed invasive plants across the entire state. If we really understood, who is selling which plants across the state, it would really give us a lot of useful information for additional progress on both legislation as well as other activities to get these plants out of the trade. Some other legislative successes that we've had this year. One was we got a bill. We created a bill, got it passed and signed by the governor. That will now require landscape designers and plant installers to inform the landowner if any of the DCR listed invasive plants are going to be planted. So the expectation here is that many landowners, if they are told that invasive plants are going to be planted on their properties, hopefully they will ask, gee, what's the alternative? Gee, can't I get a native plant or something that's not invasive to do this kind of work? And in fact, the nursery trade has told us in the past that more than half of their product is actually sold through these kinds of professionals as opposed to going through the retail trade. So we're hoping that as this bill gets implemented, that it will really make a difference. So we've been helping VDACS, the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, with the regulations needed to implement that. The other thing we did help with getting through the legislature this year was some budget amendments. So this provided some initial funding for the Department of Forestry, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, as well as the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. So they all got funding for positions and other activities so finally, they can start implementing the state's 10-year-old invasive species management plan. So this is a great step forward, and we're going to be working this year to try and secure some additional funding for the Department of Wildlife Resources. So stay tuned. We've got some other things in the docket that we'll be pursuing with the legislature this year as well. In addition to all of that, we will be looking for someone actually to hire as a Blue Ridge PRISM employee to be our coalition programs manager. So stay tuned if that's something that you're seriously interested in. you can always send us a resume. And last but not least, we're coming into Q4, which is our traditional, Q4 fourth quarter fundraising season. The Blue Ridge PRISM is supported entirely by donations, and a large portion of those donations comes from our fundraising activities that we'll be launching here in the next couple of weeks. And so if you are a fan of what we're doing and want to help support us, we would really appreciate donations as Q4 unfolds here. So stay tuned for that. Other than that, again, welcome aboard, and I'm sure you are, as am I, looking forward to hearing from Linda Fink on what's happening with all our insects. So thank you very much, and it's yours again, Rowena.
Thanks so much, Rod. That was a great update. Lots going on with PRISM, and we are really working hard to make a difference in Virginia. So thank you. Now I'm very happy to introduce Linda Fink, who will be our speaker for today. Just a short bio for her. Linda Fink is a field biologist with expertise in ecology, entomology, conservation, and animal behavior. Recently retired from Sweetbriar College. She was the Doris McConnell Duberg Professor of Ecology. Professor Fink has a BA from Amherst College and a master's and PhD degrees in zoology from the University of Florida. In collaboration with her late husband, Lincoln Brower, who was a monarch butterfly expert, Linda published research on the ecology, physiology, and conservation of monarch butterflies. She has received research funding from the National Science Foundation and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Linda is enthusiastic about engaging people of all ages with the natural world, and she was deeply honored to have been awarded the Excellence in Teaching Award by the student government at Sweetbriar College. In 2017, the Virginia Museum of Natural History awarded her the Thomas Jefferson Medal for outstanding contributions to natural science education. Linda, I'm so happy to introduce you today, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you take over.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I look forward to talking with you today about insects, and let's see if sharing my screen works.
Looks good.
All right, hang on, I've got to. All right. So, as Rowena said, I'm a natural historian. I'm a naturalist. And now that I'm retired, I get to do the things I like to do. And looking at insects and talking to people about insects is one of those things. So what I'd like to do today is I've divided my talk into 3 parts, and Rowena and I have agreed that we'll pause for questions and comments after each of those 3 sections. So I do hope you'll put questions into the Q&A, and maybe I can answer some fraction of them. Okay, so we're going to begin by admiring insects because there's a lot to admire. Then we're going to look at insect population trends, and most of those trends are not good. Oops, excuse me. And then we're going to focus on 2 introduced species, not Mothra or Godzilla, but perhaps similarly influential. So let's get started. Insects are the dominant multicellular organism on the planet. There are more kinds of insects. So if we talk about number of species, there are more species of insects than any other multicellular organism. Number of individuals, if anybody were to bother to try and count them, and biomass. If we could scoop up everybody and weigh them, we'd find that the weight of the insects was more than the weight of the mammals or the weights of the green plants, which could be surprising, but apparently is so. The speciescape is designed to show us the relative numbers of described species in different groups. That big black monster is supposed to be an insect. And just for scale, in terms of diversity, there's a little elephant in the middle representing the diversity of the mammals. And here is somebody representing the diversity of the birds. So I hope this can persuade you, whether you enjoy insects or don't enjoy insects, they're a really important part of our world, and it behooves us all to know something about them. So why are insects so successful? There are a lot of reasons for that success. And before I run down a list, I've put some pictures up that help to explain some of the reasons for their success. So I just want you to take a look at those pictures and think about what they mean for this group of organisms. So one set of explanations for why insects have become successful is around the fact that they are small in size, they have short generation times, and they can have lots of kids. What all of this means is there are many opportunities for evolution to take place. Having a short generation time and a lot of offspring means that there are a lot of mutations, a lot of opportunities for natural selection and the other agents of evolutionary change to affect populations and produce specializations. And that small size means there are so many ways to divide up the world and live your life. So that if you are small enough that you could live your entire life feeding on one seed, those of you who are plant biologists know how many kinds of plants there are in the world, and you can see that an insect that can specialize on one kind of seed can have a very specialized life. And if we have 10,000 kinds of seeds in a habitat, that provides opportunities for thousands of species of insects. Other reasons for success are that the insect group has two innovations that have really helped them be successful. One is that they happened to evolve along with the flowering plants. So both groups have been important selective agents for the others. As the flowering plants have diversified, insects have both been one of the causes of that diversification and one of the organisms that has benefited from it. As the plants have diversified, that has been selective pressures for the insects to diversify. Insects evolved flight early in their history, and only 4 groups have evolved flight. In addition to the insects, we have the bats and the birds, and there was a group of reptiles now extinct, the pterosaurs. For each of these groups, having the ability to fly has given that group some great success. It allows you to find food, find better habitats, escape from enemies, find mates, escape from bad conditions. A final reason I've put up here is shown by these pictures on the lower right, showing the pupation and emergence as an adult of a monarch butterfly. The majority of insects have what we call complete metamorphosis, which means that their juvenile stages, their larvae, live completely different lives from their adult stages. The larvae can have specializations of the gut and the sensory apparatus and locomotion that make them good at finding food and growing. They go through developmental change, the pupation, where they break down the larval body systems and rebuild new ones so they can have a new digestive tract, new sensory systems, new appendages for mobility, and allow them to have specialized features that make them good at being adults, which the 2 major roles for adults are dispersal and reproduction. So having the ability in one organism to have immature specialized for one kind of life and the adult specialized for another has been an incredible agent of success for the insects. So what does all this insect diversity do? Let's take a quick look through the different ways that groups of insects make a living. This is primarily based on what the insects feed on, and it also has to do with the way that we tend to interact with insects or how we classify and think about insects. So when we think about insects in a positive light, many of us are thinking about their role as pollinators, as helping the flowering plants to move their sperm to the eggs and produce new offspring. And many of us think of honeybees and other bees as pollinators. We also have butterflies and their relatives, the moths. But there also are other groups that do pollination, including this handsome fly on the left, beetles, and several other groups also can be minor participants in pollination. And when we think of pollinators, we tend to think of them as beneficial insects or good insects. And we tend to come up with, we want to have more of them. We want to help to support them in our environments. Another major way that insects make a living is by feeding on all those green plants. So the herbivores are feeding on every part of every green plant, so that there are insects specialized on chewing leaves, insects specialized on burrowing between the upper and lower epidermis of leaves and feeding entirely within as leaf miners. Insects are specialized on feeding inside stems, within trunks, in the roots, every kind of fruit and nut and seed. Insects are feeding on the vascular system, the circulatory system, like this phloem feeding aphid at the bottom. And unlike the pollinators, because we want those green plants for our own uses, many of us think about these herbivores as insect pests. I hope that many of you recognize that an awful lot of these insects are not really harming our plants and are doing a lot of interesting things. But when you have friends and colleagues who have negative feelings about insects, it is true that there is a lot of economic damage. There is a lot of destruction of food supplies coming from some of these insects. There's a small group of insects that do seed dispersal. We don't think of insects as seed dispersers, but here in the eastern forest, a lot of our spring ephemeral wildflowers, those understory plants, have their seeds dispersed by ants. These flowers include wild ginger, bloodroot, trilliums, Dutchman's breeches. So it's another good beneficial role that some insects are playing. Insects are really important as recyclers. So taking dead organic material, whether it's in dead bodies of other animals or dung and other kinds of fecal material, insects are really good at recycling this material. So on the left is a burying beetle carrying a rodent of some kind. It'll bury it and lay its eggs on it. On the right, on the top, we have dung beetles, and at the bottom are some dung flies. Insects, of course, are really important as prey for a lot of bigger animals, including many birds, reptiles, amphibians, and other insects. And insects themselves are predators. So on the right, we see a predatory stink bug sucking away at a larval beetle. Some insects are parasites, and parasites spend part or all of their life feeding in or on a larger host. They're gaining some of their nutrients from the host. And a characteristic of parasites is that while they might have a negative effect on the host, they might make it sick, they might lower its growth rate or its reproductive rate, they don't kill the host. On the left here is a poor gray squirrel who has a number of botfly larvae feeding on it. And on the right is a flea. Parasitoids are a specialized group of insects that some people who aren't too familiar with insects haven't met before. Parasitoids are similar to parasites, but not identical to them. They develop inside or on the outside of another arthropod, an insect or a spider, which serves as the host, and they eventually kill the host. So unlike parasites, a parasitoid does kill its host. On the bottom left here, we have a tiny wasp attacking, putting her eggs inside an aphid. On the top right is a hornworm caterpillar with a lot of cocoons of parasitic wasp on it. And on the bottom right is an enlarged view from that caterpillar. You see one larval wasp who has come out of the caterpillar's body and is spinning a silk cocoon around it. So in both of these cases, the immature parasitoid is going to develop inside the body of the host, and eventually it will kill the host and come out as an adult. So I hope you can see from this that every species of insect has its own story and is worth getting to know. So here are just a couple of my favorite stories. Here on the left, we have an aphid. This is a female aphid. She's never mated, she's a virgin, and she's producing a live offspring. She's giving live birth to a daughter, a clone. I don't think this is the kind of reproduction we typically think of insects as having, but most aphids go through asexual reproduction for a lot of the year. On the right, we have a tropical caterpillar. And on the upper picture, you see how it might be resting on a plant. But when it's disturbed, it turns its thorax over, it inflates itself with air, and it has fake eye spots and looks a lot like a snake. So those eye spots are not the caterpillar's eye spots. The caterpillar head is hidden underneath this, but it's a wonderful adaptation to scare off potential predators of that caterpillar. Here is a moth caterpillar that is being eaten alive by parasitic wasps. So it was attacked by a parasitoid, a wasp. She laid one egg inside, which split into many, many embryos. And I don't want to think about the life that this poor caterpillar had, but it was very successful for the parasitoid. And this last story, I don't know what's going on here. This is an insect called the lantern bug. It's a tropical insect, and its eye is right over here. This circle in the middle, this little greenish circle is its eye. This whole protuberance on the right is a hardened, air-filled shell. Nobody knows what it's doing. I don't know what it's doing. But it's an example of, if you have several million species of insects, all sorts of weird and wonderful adaptations evolve. Some of them we understand, a lot of them we don't understand. So my take-home message at this point for this first part is simply that insects are incredibly important parts of our biota, and they are incredibly interesting. So I'd like to pause here, Rowena. If there are some questions related to this, we'll stop and chat about them.
Well, I guess the first question that might be related to this is, since you're talking about so many different insects, is there a reliable app that people can perhaps use on their phone to identify them?
Yeah, unfortunately, there isn't. And that is because there are so many kinds of insects. So those of you who have tried to use a field guide for insects or iNaturalist, it can get you close. And if it's a very common insect, the identification will probably be correct. But not every stink bug is a brown marmorated stink bug. Not every beetle that's feeding on your plant is a Japanese beetle. So apps work well when there's a relatively small number of species, but there are too many different kinds of insects, and their ranges are too poorly known for there to be a really good app at this point in time. There are apps, well, so the best website for learning about insects is something called bugguide.net.
Okay, bugguide.net. I'll type that into the chat in just a sec. I guess people are asking because they're interested in the insects, but also maybe wanting to know the good from the bad, if there's such a thing, good insects from bad insects, or in PRISM's case, it would be native insects and invasive insects. And so where do you think would be the best place to find out about insects of concern?
So there are more kinds of insects than native insects and invasive insects. And so I want to clarify that our biota, the insects that we interact with, an awful lot of them were brought to the Eastern United States accidentally or on purpose, often by European immigrants, over a couple of hundred years. So there are an awful lot of common insects we interact with who are not native, but are also not invasive. So of the non-native insects that have come into this country, it's only a small proportion of them that are really pest insects. So unfortunately, what I encourage people to do is pick one group of insects you're interested in, or one kind of plant you're interested in, and start by learning about that group, that plant and what feeds on it, or that particular group of insects and their specialized resources for each of those. Give yourself a little bit of confidence with one group of organisms, and then use that as your basis for expanding your knowledge. The best way to learn about, for example, garden pests is to watch what they're doing in your garden. And yes, you can look things up and read about it, but you can find out an awful lot by asking yourself, is this insect on just the new leaves or on new and old leaves? Is it under the leaves or on top of the leaves? How much damage is it actually doing? I think a lot of times people become concerned about insects when they see just a few. They may not want to share their plant. They don't want anybody eating any of it, but most green plants have plenty of biomass that they can support quite a few insects and support us as well. So I'm kind of backing out of talking about problem insects. I'm not denying there are problem insects. And in the third part of the talk, we're going to go in detail into two of them. But
Great.
most insects are not problem insects.
And, I've gotten to that point in my life where I'm happy when I see that insects have been eating my plants, 'cause then I know they're doing some good. And you make a really good point. And I think I should have, when I saw that PRISM was interested in the native or invasive, you were absolutely correct. There are native plants and insects, and there are non-native plants and insects, and only a small portion of the non-native plants and insects are actually invasive or an issue. So we like to say no one's gonna like ask you to get rid of your grandma's lilac or anything like that. But very good points. We've got a bunch of other questions that people would love to know, and one of them is, you talked about parasitic wasps. Are they good or bad? What
Yes.
They're good. Okay, tell us
And
why.
bad. Sure.
Okay.
Depends what they're parasitizing and how many there are. And I mean, good or bad for anything, we have to decide if somebody is saying good means it is native to the Eastern United States and bad means it's not, then many parasitic wasps were brought in to control somebody else. If they're controlling something we don't like, we say they're beneficial. If they're attacking something we do like, we say that they're a problem. So an awful lot of insects can be harmless in most situations, might have an outbreak population and cause a problem in one little spot in Pennsylvania or in one drought year. But that doesn't mean that they're always going to be problems.
Got it. I'm just going to ask a couple more questions.
The insect defender here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to ask probably two more questions because I know we need to keep an eye on the time. But Taylor asked if aphids serve a specific purpose because they've noticed that they're seeing a lot of yellow aphids on their milkweed plants.
Right. The yellow aphid is called Aphis nerii, the oleander aphid, and it is not native to it's not native to the United States. They are attacked by a whole lot of other insects, so they provide food for many other insects. Often they're low density populations and don't hurt the milkweed, but certainly a lot of aphids can lower the success of the milkweed. But there's a whole community of other insects that interact with them. Some of them parasitize them, some of them feed on them. So they're providing food for other things.
Right. And I guess last question for right now. And for any questions we didn't ask, get a chance to, we will try to ask them at the end. Susan wrote, insects are seed dispersers. So what do the ants do with all these seeds that they move around and store?
I'm glad you asked the question. I love ant seed dispersal, and I didn't really feel it was something I could talk about, but now I will. The wildflowers that rely on ants to disperse their seeds put a little fleshy structure onto the seed. So the seed, the embryo, is protected. The ant isn't going to eat that, but it's going to eat this little fleshy thing attached to it called an elaiosome. So the ant carries this back to her nest, breaks off the elaiosome, and the ants feed on it, and they throw out the seed as trash. And an ant's trash pile is a great place to be a seed. You're being buried somewhere that the ants are going to protect it. It's a whole lot of dead organic material. So it's a pretty great strategy, it turns out.
Yeah, they help each other out there.
Right.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to mute myself again, and so you can go on with the rest of your presentation.
Okay. So Many people are concerned about insects. Sometimes people who don't like insects are concerned that there are too many on their tomato plant or too many stink bugs in their house. But those of us who are interested in natural communities or concerned about conservation are recognizing that there seem to be declines in the population sizes of a lot of insects. So this is a data set that is based on data in the IUCN's Red List. The IUCN is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and they keep a database called the Red List, which looks at species of concern and what are their population trends, increasing or decreasing. And this data set, each column is a different group of insects, the beetles, the bees and wasps, etc. And what I want you to see is the red bars represent the percent of insects within that database where the population trend is negative. And so what we see is, well, for each of these groups, at least some proportion of the insects show a negative trend that varies from insect group to insect group. We have to be careful when we interpret data sets about insect declines, including this one. We have to ask ourselves, well, how does an insect species get included in the IUCN list? And most species are on the IUCN list because people are concerned in some way. So while this is showing that, yes, there are a lot of insects showing declines, this doesn't really tell us how big an issue it is globally or in any particular region. But we do know that native insect populations are changing. Many of you are interested in the monarch butterfly, and if you've lived in an area long enough, you may have a sense that you're not seeing as many as you did 20 years ago, 30 years ago. On the top right is a native bee, and there are concerns about native pollinators and whether some of them or many of them are in decline. On the bottom is a firefly, and again, those of us who have lived in one area for a long time may say in the summer, on the summer evenings, I'm just not seeing as many fireflies as I used to see. So let's take one of these as an example to look at in a little more detail, and that's the monarch. And we're going to look at it both because we all know a lot about, or many of us know a lot about the monarch, and because I happen to know a lot about the monarch because my husband, as Rowena mentioned, Lincoln Brower, was an expert on the monarch. So the monarch is a butterfly whose caterpillars will only feed on milkweeds. There are a lot of species of milkweed in the United States, and many of them are used as larval hosts for the monarch, completes its development, and comes out as an adult. There are several generations a year in the United States, but in the late fall, the generation that's coming out as adults right now is going to leave North America, not North America, it's going to leave Canada and then the eastern United States. And the eastern monarchs migrate to central Mexico. The western population of monarchs migrate to the coast of California. So this is a map showing that while the monarchs are breeding throughout much of north of the United States and southern Canada, at this time of year, everybody is moving to a wintering ground, either in central Mexico or on the California coast. And it's an amazing phenomenon, this migration. This is an aerial photo Lincoln took some years ago. All of that orange is monarch butterflies on fir trees at high elevations in the forests of Michoacan, west of Mexico City. So just imagine how many butterflies it takes to be able to see this from a helicopter. And it turns out that one of the best ways to estimate the population size of the monarch from year to year is to look at how big these wintering colonies of butterflies are. And so the area of forest occupied by the butterflies in Mexico is used as a measure of the size of the population of monarchs in the eastern United States. And if we look at this data, we now have over 30 years of data. Our vertical axis is what's the area of forest occupied by the monarchs, and then we're going from the first year for which this shows data is 93, 94, and the last bar on the right is from last winter. And I hope you see that there is a really strong negative relationship. So we really are seeing a decline. It's statistically significant. So it really is the case that monarch butterflies are in decline in the eastern United States. So if we ask ourselves why, there are a whole lot of reasons. This is an incomplete list, and I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but there is a major loss of habitat for milkweeds in much of the breeding range, attributed primarily to industrial agriculture, converting to the use of producing single crops and getting rid of any waste areas for weeds to be. So this is a slide Lincoln used to like to show. That's corn on the left and soybeans on the right and a mown area in the middle. There is not a, quote, weed in sight, but that means there's not a native plant in sight. There is no habitat here for the monarchs to feed on. In addition to problems with loss of milkweed habitat in the United States, there are a lot of problems in Mexico with loss of habitat. Illegal logging, thinning of the forests is changing the overwintering habit for the butterflies. So as a result of recognizing this trend and a lot of people being concerned about the monarch, in 2014, a petition was submitted to designate the monarch, to put the monarch on the endangered species list. It was proposed that its population was in such decline that it should be recognized as a threatened species. While this was submitted in 2014, the Fish and Wildlife Service took years of additional study, consultation with every expert on monarch butterflies and milkweeds in the world. And in 2020, the Fish and Wildlife Service made a decision. After a thorough assessment, Fish and Wildlife Service found that adding the monarch butterfly to the list of threatened and endangered species is warranted, meaning the evidence is strong enough that that butterfly does deserve being listed as a threatened species, but precluded by work on higher priority listing actions. What this means is there are so many species at risk in the United States, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has limited resources, that they prioritize the species that they're going to put on the list. Because once a species is put on the list as endangered or threatened, there are a whole lot of required actions that must be taken. And if you can't afford to take those actions, you don't want to add the species to the list. So the monarch is reevaluated every couple of years. I think its next evaluation is going to be either in December, this coming December, or January. The monarch is, there are a lot of groups who are working to improve the conditions for the monarchs. Here are 3 organizations on the left I've listed that are very involved in monarch conservation. On the right are 2 groups very involved in the education of the general public about the biology and conservation of the monarch butterfly. So while the monarch is in decline, there is a lot of effort in trying to reverse the decline. The monarch is not going to go extinct. What is at risk at this point is this amazing phenomenon of massive numbers migrating south and overwintering and repopulating the United States every spring. So we know a lot about the monarch butterfly. We're putting a lot of effort into reversing this decline of the monarch butterfly. Is it just the monarch, or are there other species of insects we also should be concerned about? It isn't just monarchs, okay? So these are headlines from 2018, very alarmist headlines from the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post. What happened was 3 papers were published demonstrating evidence of big declines in a lot of species in different areas of the world. So it was raising the alarm. There are a lot of insects in trouble. And while we're not quite as apocalyptic as we talk about it now, this certainly raised people's interests and concerns. So here is one data set as an example. This is looking at butterfly abundances, and these scientists collected data from, looked at literature data from a number of parts of the world. And so they looked for these butterflies. Is the overall trend that the abundance was increasing over time, stable over time, or decreasing over time. And if we look here for the United Kingdom, 11 species were increasing in population trends, population size, 22 were decreasing. In each of these 4 geographic areas, you can see that more species were showing negative trends than positive trends. So here are 3 examples. These are 3 of the species in Ohio where the spring azure is increasing in abundance. The tiger swallowtail is stable, and the black swallowtail in Ohio seems to be decreasing in its abundance. So what are the major drivers of these declines? This is from one paper, surveyed all the literature on insect declines and identified those studies in which the scientists could figure out why the insect populations were declining. There are a lot of insects for which we have no evidence what their population trends are. For most of the insects where we do see a trend, we don't know why that trend is taking place. So this is an important data set saying where we can figure out what is causing the declines, what are the factors. And you can see on the right, there are a whole lot of causes of these declines that have been identified. Most importantly, intensive agriculture and pesticides are responsible for about 1/3 of the declines. So things like this turning the Midwest into monocultures of corn and soybean, providing no habitat for anybody else, killing off everybody else with pesticides. Climate change seems to be involved in about 5%. We certainly would expect that to be increasing over time as climate change's effects increase and as we are able to study these effects more. This little wedge at the top of 1.9% is where the declines can be attributed to some extent to negative effects from other introduced species. So while there are many factors producing these declines, introduced species are, at least in some cases, factors in those declines. So, take-home message for this is that, yes, it is true that many insect populations are declining. There are many reasons for this. It is very hard to do the studies to figure out, are the insects actually declining? Many insect populations fluctuate dramatically from year to year. So what we're looking for is a trend. We're looking for a signal in a very noisy data set. And scientists are putting more effort into collecting the data, allowing us to see the trends. And so, unfortunately, more robust data sets are showing that many of these declines are real. And I'm going to next show 2 examples where it does look like introduced insects are causing declines in native insect populations. And Rowena, this is another good point to pause to see if we have some more questions that people would like to address right now.
Great. So we got a question from someone when they registered and they typed it into the registration tab. Which insects or groups are likely to survive that, doing
Right.
well and
So,
that's cockroaches.
well, so things that will do well are generalists. They have broad geographic ranges, aren't particularly fussy about their habitats. So cockroaches can eat a whole lot of different things. But an herbivore that has a whole lot of different plants it's able to feed on is going to do better than a specialist. A pollinator who is able to collect pollen from many different kinds of flowers is going to survive better than somebody who is specialized, like a yucca moth who will only feed on yucca.
Makes sense. So when you talk about specialized insects, do you actually have of your own some favorite specialized insect and native plant pairs?
No, because my favorite insects are usually whichever ones I'm looking at that point in time. I call my property, for example, Walking Stick Ridge, because when my husband and I moved here, we happened to live where there was an outbreak population of the native walking stick. It's really scarce everywhere else. It happened to be really abundant here. I never figured out why. So I have an awful lot of favorites.
Okay. You mentioned in this last part of your presentation, the problem with pesticides and how it's affecting insect populations. But as you know, in invasive plant control, glyphosate or triclopyr is used. How negatively would you say that affects insects?
Yeah. So any broad application of glyphosate, it's killing every weed out there. It's getting rid of every possible plant that many of our native insects would be feeding on. So a direct application of glyphosate to kill a particular invasive plant, there are costs and benefits to everything. So as long as it's not a large area that's being completely inundated with the glyphosate, as long as there are still native plants being left without the effect of the glyphosate, the insects should be okay. It's when it's used on a landscape scale that it really is becoming deleterious.
And I feel like I should say that Blue Ridge PRISM teaches using very direct and controlled herbicide application. For example, with Tree of Heaven, it's just in the little pit divots that we make in the trunk and
Right.
make sure to shield any native plants that are surrounding it. So responsible application of
Absolutely.
glyphosate and triclopyr. Okay. Are there native milkweed species that you recommend planting for butterflies, or are there some that are more
Yes.
successful than
So
others?
it's easier to say the only milkweed that monarch conservation biologists say you shouldn't plant in anywhere except in, well, actually anywhere, is the tropical milkweed Asclepias curasavica. That's a really popular plant in Florida. I'm not sure how far north. And there are a variety of reasons why that's problematical, but that's not an issue up here. There are more than 100 milkweeds in North America, but here in the eastern United States, it's Asclepias syriaca, the common milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa, the butterfly weed, Asclepias incarnata, the swamp milkweed. If you're higher in the mountains, there's Asclepias exaltata. The monarchs will feed on all of those, and you should encourage all of them in your gardens.
Great. So we've had someone who's been looking at the graphic that you shared with us. It seems like it looks like perhaps the monarch population is cyclical on a 10-year basis. Is that a thing, or what the graph is showing?
I don't know that anybody has looked for a cyclic pattern. That would be interesting to see. There are so many factors affecting how the population size in one year is related to the population size the year before. Is it a drought year? Is it a hurricane year? Was there a big freezing storm in Mexico? So I have not read anything about any evidence of a cycle. I think it more is evidence of insect populations fluctuating for a whole variety of reasons. There are only a small number of cases of natural populations where we really see cycles. So I think I would rather say it's fluctuations.
All right. And Nina typed in, I'll just read it. Is assisted migration proven or still just a theory? And she's referring to insects moving north and providing their host plants in northern areas.
I do not know the current literature on this, right? Whether that is something advisable or not. But one of the challenges of climate change is that as species shift their ranges, nobody tells pollinators and the plants they're pollinating, you should move at the same rate. Or an herbivore and its host plant, you should move at the same rate. So we certainly are getting cases where an insect is moving faster than somebody it interacts with, or the other way around. I don't know the degree to which assisted migration is a solution to that.
Okay. And last question, Lynn says, on the pie chart, does the introduced species category include only introduced fauna, or does the category include both introduced fauna and introduced flora? Or it's, okay,
I think it's all introduced species, because the paper was not just how insects are affecting insects. It was everything that would have affected it. So I would have to go back and look at the paper, but as far as I know, it's not just insects affecting
okay.
insects.
So flora and fauna.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, we will try to answer any of the remaining questions at the end, including any other questions that you have for Linda. So,
Okay.
okay.
All right, good. And Rowena, I happen to be totally without a clock right now.
Okay. So let me tell you, we are at 12:26.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay, so PRISM is addressing the challenges of invasive plant species. Certainly, there are many troublesome introduced species. I won't call them all invasive because, again, invasive depends on whether there are way too many of them for a particular habitat. But here we see 4 examples of non-native insects that a lot of us don't like to have around us in this part of the eastern United States. The marmorated stink bug, European hornet, hemlock woolly adelgid, Japanese beetle. I could probably ask you to list your favorite non-native insect, and we'd be able to make a long list of things that we're frustrated by. But what I want to focus on are these 2 troublesome introduced insects. The one on the right, many of you have met in the last decade, the emerald ash borer. This is a bark-feeding beetle. But I want to start by looking at this fly, Compsoglypha consonata, a parasitic fly. And there's no common name for Compsoglypha consonata. I'm just going to call it Compsoglypha. Okay. And Compsoglypha consonata interacts with another non-native problem species called the spongy moth. And the big message of this part of my talk is that 2 wrongs don't make a right. Spongy moth has been a problem as an invasive. Compsoglypha was brought in potentially to help control it, and things have just not worked out that way. Okay. So Compsoglypha is a fly in the family Tachinidae. This is a really important group of flies. They are all parasitoids. So in these flies, the female lays her egg in or on some other kind of insect. Her offspring develop inside that other insect. And when it's done developing, it kills the host and comes out and pupates and completes its development. The hosts of tachinids include many groups of insects. Many of them are pests. So there are many pest species that have tachinid parasitoids. And so we like those parasitoids, but many of our native insects also have some tachinids that parasitize them. The females can attack in all sorts of ways. A female may lay her egg on the face or on the back of a host insect. She may insert the egg inside the host. She may deposit the eggs on a plant, and the insect host eats the egg. It hatches inside the insect's gut and moves into its hemolymph. Or the larvae may burrow inside the host on their own. So it's a large group of flies. There are more than 1,000 kinds of tachinids in the US and more than 8,000 species worldwide. As I said, they're really important in biological control. So many of our agricultural pests have tachinids as one part of the suite of enemies that are used in integrated pest management. So in this light that tachinids can be useful to help control pest insects, Compsoglypha was introduced to the United States to help control the spongy moth, Lamantria dispar. And Lamantria dispar was known until a few years ago as the gypsy moth. The gypsy moth was given by the Entomological Society the new name, the spongy moth. So Compsoglypha is this European parasitoid fly. deliberately released in the United States to help try and control populations of this European forest tree herbivore that had been accidentally released into the US. Here's the spongy moth. We see a male on the left, two females in the middle laying their eggs. They lay egg masses on the trunks of trees, cover them with hairs from their bodies. They overwinter as eggs. In the spring, just when the new leaves of the trees are bursting bud, the caterpillars hatch out as tiny gregarious groups. They move up into the leaves and feed. There's one generation a year. So here we see an annual cycle, and you can see that the larvae are out in the spring, April and May, finish development, pupate in June, come out as adults and mate in August and September. And then most of the year, they're just on the tree trunks as egg masses. The caterpillars will feed on the leaves of many kinds of trees. The young caterpillars prefer oaks, but as they get bigger, they are willing to move off onto many other kinds of trees. And a whole lot of trees in our eastern forests are susceptible to being attacked by spongy moths. Healthy trees can usually survive defoliation. So these moths can be so abundant, there can be so many caterpillars that they can defoliate an entire oak tree. But since there's just one generation a year and they're finished with their development by late spring, many of these trees can put out a second flush of leaves. Their growth may be lower in that year, but they will survive that. In contrast, stressed trees, if trees are already stressed by other diseases, by drought, by the way we manage our landscapes, then there can be high mortality from the spongy moth. This picture on the right is a picture from Shenandoah National Park, and that brown you see was defoliation a few years ago. Those trees weren't killed, but they were defoliated. So the spongy moth has spread relatively slowly through the eastern United States. If we realize that it was introduced in the late 19th century, and here we are partway through the 21st century, it got to Virginia around when I did in the early 1990s, and it really hasn't spread much farther. So it is still existing in our forests. It is still considered a forest pest, but it's being managed pretty well by a whole lot of control measures. So I want to take a brief aside to say, well, how did this one get here? Since this group, this audience is especially interested in invasive species, and we know that they get to the United States in a whole lot of ways, we know exactly how the spongy moth got to the United States. And we have to look as an explanation for why it came here to the 19th century French silk trade. France had a very big, very lucrative production of silk. So on the top right is Bombyx mori, the silk moth that feeds on mulberry. And centuries before, traders had brought silk moths from Asia and brought mulberry trees, and there was a thriving business of producing silk and then using that silk to produce textiles in France. But on the bottom right is a graph of the production of silk moth cocoons over time. And what I just want you to see is there is this big crash late in the 19th century. The silk moths were attacked by some diseases in France, and the French were concerned that their entire French industry was going to go kaput. It happened to be that in Massachusetts, there was a French astronomer named Trouvelot. And I don't know why a French astronomer decided that he wanted to save the French silk industry, but he did. And he had the idea that now we can say that is a totally cockamamie idea. He imported the spongy moth caterpillars. He imported Lamantria dispar caterpillars with the idea that he would hybridize it with some of the North American native silk moths and try to produce a new silk producing species that could be sent back to France and used for silk production. This idea was wrong in so many ways. We could have a whole discussion of that. But what's important to us is that Truvolo had a little accident and some of his caterpillars got away. And it is because of this one man deciding to bring some Lamantria dispar caterpillars over from Europe that we have this the spongy moth problem in the eastern United States. So for over a century, we have been trying a variety of control measures. And as I've said, the spongy moth is in pretty good control now. There are outbreak populations that can be that are being monitored and sprayed with pesticides every year, but the spread has been slowed, and it's not the major forest pest that it was several decades ago. One of the control measures is to use natural enemies, and as is done in a lot of pest control, a number of species were found in the native range of Lamantria dispar, a lot of natural enemies, and brought over to the United States and released to say, can they control that pest here in the United States? And this is how Compsoglypha came to the United States. It was brought in and released deliberately multiple times over an 80-year period. It seemed to not take, it didn't seem to get established, and so they would bring over more and release them. And Compsoglypha does attack spongy moth caterpillars. It does parasitize them, but it's not effective as a control measure. There aren't enough of them to attack enough of the spongy moths to help control the spongy moth populations. Unfortunately, it can be effective against some of our native Lepidoptera. And there are two major biological reasons why it's being successful in attacking native butterflies and moths. It has these two characteristics that we should have thought more about before we brought it into the United States and released it. The gypsy moth has one generation a year. The caterpillars are done in June. Compsoglypha has multiple generations. So if it's parasitized a gypsy moth, the adult comes out, looks around, can't find any spongy moth caterpillars to lay eggs on. She goes and finds some other caterpillar to lay her eggs on. So for all the other generations that Compsoglypha has in a year, it's using hosts other than the spongy moth. The second problem is that it is a generalist. It's capable of developing in more than 200 different species of butterflies and moths. So while Compsoglypha was brought in to help to regulate the population of Lamantria dispar, it failed at that, and instead it seems to be causing to be part of the reason why some of our native moths are in decline. Among the insects it's affecting are these beautiful silk moths. So this is a group, the silk moths, the Saturniids, are a charismatic group of insects. I hope many of you have encountered Luna moths and Polyphemus. They're a great group of insects. Here's a rosy maple moth saying hi to you on the bottom. And in the northeastern US, in New England and New York, naturalists and lepidopterists in particular have known that many of these large silk moth populations have been in decline for many decades. They're no longer found in the same numbers they were 50, 60, 70 years ago. So here, for example, is a summary of the status of the big silk moths in Connecticut. And I've just highlighted some in yellow, and extirpated means, of course, they're gone from Connecticut. It's not that these species are gone from the United States, but they used to exist in Connecticut. Now they don't. Among these species, this top photograph is the imperial moth, Eocles imperialis, gone from Connecticut. The bottom beautiful caterpillar is Citheronia regalis, the royal walnut moth. You can see from the caterpillar, it's also known as the hickory horned devil. So here are charismatic, large moths that seem to be in decline. And it turns out that one factor in the decline is Compsoglypha. So Jeff Bettner and his wife Cindy and his colleague Joe Elkington did a study asking to what degree could Compsoglypha be a potential explanation for this decline in the big silk moths. So they did an experiment where they put caterpillars of two species, of the two species shown on the left, put them out in the wild on native host plants, left them out for a certain number of days, brought them back in, raised them up, and looked to see if they were parasitized. And if they were parasitized, which species of parasitoids were attacking them. And what they found was that there was very high mortality on their caterpillars that was attributable to Compsognathus. So both Cecropia and Promethea had more than half of their caterpillars were killed by this by this parasitic fly. Hemileucomia on the bottom right was a third species they looked at. They found caterpillars in the wild. They didn't put their own caterpillars out, and a third of the caterpillars were killed by Compsognathus. What Bettner et al. Concluded, or what they stated, was our results suggest that reported declines of silk moth populations in New England may be caused by the importation and introduction of C. consonata. While this is not absolute proof that the introduction of Compsognathus has caused the decline of those silk moths in New England, it is strong evidence that they are at least part of the explanation. They're part of the problem. So what we see is there is evidence that some introduced species can have negative effects on native insect populations. I want to give us another case study. So that was Compsognathus. Here is another case study, is the emerald ash borer, which unfortunately many of us here in the eastern US have become familiar with in the last 20 years. This is a bark beetle that was introduced from Asia a little more than 20 years ago. It was first reported in 2002. It probably got here a few years earlier. And the larvae feed under the bark of the trees. They're feeding on the cambium, on the xylem and phloem. After 1 to 2 years, they emerge as adults and attack new trees. And the populations can be so large that they girdle the trees, kill off the cambium, and kill the trees that way. So there's a lot of evidence we can see when trees are attacked. It turns out they attack both healthy and unhealthy ash trees. They attack every species of ash tree we have in the eastern United States. They attack landscape trees and forest trees, little ones and big ones. So no ash tree is safe from the emerald ash borer. Here's the distribution of our two most common ash trees in the eastern United States. And here's the distribution of the emerald ash borer. So in contrast to the spongy moth, which in well over a century hasn't spread far beyond New England and the mid-Atlantic, this beetle has spread throughout most of the United States in 2 decades. Here is the timeline in Virginia. You can see that over a decade, it's spread over the entire state. And it has killed off certainly most of the ash trees on my property, and I would imagine many of you have been dealing with this as well. So as this is killing off a large number of ash trees in eastern North America, it's having a whole lot of ecological effects. And so this is a quote from a paper 10 years ago, quote, "It appears increasingly likely that the emerald ash borer could functionally extirpate one of North America's most widely distributed tree genera with devastating economic and ecological impacts." So I mentioned the IUCN keeps the red list of species at risk. Here is the white ash. The IUCN now considers it critically endangered. Here's their summary for the white ash and 5 other ash trees in the eastern United States. They all have decreasing trends. They're listing 5 of them as critically endangered and 1 as endangered. So here we have an invasive, this is definitely an invasive insect, within 20 years has killed off a vast majority of our ash trees. And so we can ask, well, gee, what else is going to be affected as the ashes are disappearing? And there are a number of native insects that are at risk. So this was a paper that looked at what kinds of insects are pretty much specialized on ashes. And so as the ash tree disappears from our forests, from our landscapes, we can expect these insects to decline. And you can see it's more than 30 species of Lepidoptera, butterflies and moths, 24 Coleoptera, the beetles, a lot of bugs and flies, mites, maybe we're not too sorry about that. So there are dozens of insect species we expect to see their numbers decline. Some of them will disappear entirely. And here are photos of some of these. So this is, again, this take-home message that yes, we do have evidence that some introduced insects do have negative effects on native insect populations. And Rowena, that's where I'm going to end the formal part of my presentation. I know somebody's going to ask about the spotted lanternfly, and I'm ready to answer questions about that. But at this point, I'm going to open things up to general questions.
Great. Well, we've got lots of questions. That was fascinating. I had no idea about the spongy moth, how that came here. So that was a fascinating history. Thank you. Let me see. Before, there was one because I was curious too. It probably applies more to the second section, but there's someone in our audience who would really like to provide a habitat for dragonflies, which are fascinating creatures. And they were wondering if you do the same thing that you do with trying to cultivate a monarch habitat, or what would you do differently for dragonflies?
Well, their aquatic is immature, so you need a pond.
Okay, you need water.
The adults are flying around eating insects, but if you have a pond, you can have dragonflies and slower and streams as well. So I think you need clean water. My pond is full of dragonflies. I don't have fish in mine. I don't know the degree to which fish in your pond are going to affect dragonfly populations. But basically, clean water, lots of other things living in that water, and you can have dragonflies.
Okay, we're all going to try it. Make a pond in our yard. And we have gotten, I'm going to wade into this. We have gotten several questions about spotted lanternfly. One of them is, how far into Virginia have they moved? I can tell you they are moving relentlessly down to 81 and have reached certainly Albemarle County and beyond. So Linda, I'm going to leave it to you to talk about spotted lanternfly.
All right. Okay. Let's see. And again, Rowena, can I take 3 minutes to give general spotted lanternfly?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. I knew people were going to ask. I took it out of my regular talk because it didn't quite fit in, but I know that's what many of you want to know about. So it was first seen in the United States 10 years ago. Okay. So emerald ash borer is relatively new. It's been here a couple of decades. Spotted lanternfly, 1 decade. And those of you who have already met it, you have seen this tannish, more than an inch long insect on the bark of trees or flying around you. The females lay egg masses on the trunks of trees, just as the spongy moth does. Just as the spongy moth, they overwinter in the egg masses, and then in the spring they hatch out. On the bottom here, we see a brightly colored nymph. This is one of the immatures. So once they hatch out, they move to where they can stick their mouth parts into the plant and feed on the phloem. So these are not chewing insects, they're sucking insects. And somewhere, I looked hard, this is a picture of a lanternfly. And if you look closely, it's got a, right here. So here is front legs, and there's an extra thing pointing down here. That's its mouth part stuck into this ailanthus, I think it's ailanthus, and it's sucking away. So the favored host, as most of us now know, is ailanthus, tree of heaven. And people say, well, can I just get rid of ailanthus, which I don't want, and then the spotted lanternflies will go away? That would be nice, but it turns out that the spotted lanternfly is happy to eat other things as well. So it has been demonstrated that it can grow perfectly well and complete its development on grape and black walnut, hops, tulip poplar, other species in Virginia. So worldwide, it's known to feed on more than 100 plant groups. That's not plant species, that's plant genera in some cases. And there are many dozens in North America. So it turns out that this is going to be able to survive well, feeding on a lot of different plants here in Virginia. And here's the range map as of a month ago. So this is where it is. And I zoomed in on Virginia. I zoomed in on this part of Virginia. So most of us who have met it know that it's here. If you haven't met it yet, you will within a few years, maybe within a few weeks. I had only met the spotted lanternfly in person a year ago at Sweetbriar, which is a little bit south of where I live here in Nelson County. Sweetbriar is in Amherst County. By this year, this was my tire when I went out to Sweetbriar's apiary a few weeks ago. Each of my tires, I was just parked there, and each of my tires was covered with lanternflies. So if you don't have them yet, you will. So what else would people like to know about lanternflies?
Okay, well, I'm going to turn to our panelists and have them ask you a few questions that they've been gathering. Okay, Lauren, do you have a question for Linda that you can share with us?
Let's see. We have Taylor is asking, what efforts can we take to help control these troublesome species?
Lanternflies are all troublesome species.
Well, the question was all all the troublesome species that you mentioned.
Yeah. It's a hard question to answer because we each have to decide what are our lines in the sand and how much effort can we put into things. So certainly maintaining healthy habitat in whatever land you have some control over. And that includes not using pesticides except for targeted control of some invasives, providing a lot of native host plants, providing winter cover for things. So you know many ways that you can make your landscape more hospitable for native species. And insects are one of those groups of native species. So I would say avoid toxic chemicals and provide a diversity of native plants.
Linda, we've had someone commented that they've heard that crows are starting to eat lanternflies. Have you heard of, other native birds or species?
I reckon those of you, I was Googling for the best images of spotted lanternflies, and iNaturalist, some of you probably use it, but if you were to go on iNaturalist and look for images of spotted lanternflies, that's where I took most of mine. I found I don't know what bird this is on the left with one. Here's a praying mantid on the right eating one. There were a couple of photos of spiders eating them. So yes, native predators have discovered the spotted lanternfly. Whether any of them will be able to control them, I can't imagine that any vertebrate or large insect would. The places we should look for natural controls are parasitoids and pathogens. There will be some disease will hit these spotted lanternflies and perhaps bring their populations down. Perhaps there will be some parasitoids that either find them on their own or that we can carefully import. The rules for importation of parasitoids are much stricter now than when Compsylura was introduced. Absolutely, entomologists look at host ranges and look for non-target hosts. So we would not do something like Compsylura. We would not let that into the United States. So I'm sure people are working on parasitoids to help control them. But yes, the predators are getting them.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I know of, different things being introduced to try to control the ash borer or the woody adelgid. And there is so much research and testing done before any of these biological controls are used now. So really different from what happened with the spongy moth. Great point.
It really
Linda.
is. But which doesn't mean that mistakes may not happen, but they're going to be much rarer than they would have been. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. Natalie, do you have a question that you'd like to share with the audience and Linda?
Yeah. So I'm going to combine two questions and it's about education. So there's someone who asked, they have a client who's using a mosquito eradication company, and she's looking for verbiage on how to encourage them not to do this. And then to add to that, someone asked, are there ideas or ways to get kids to be less afraid of them, especially when they're outside?
So, yeah, and can you mute? Could you have some, there you go, thank you. So how to get kids excited about insects and less afraid? It takes another human being who is not afraid of them to give them some personal introduction. And I would say the spotted lanternflies are probably a great species to get insects excited about insects. They're big enough you can see them. They're brightly colored. They're pretty cool insects, frankly. I mean, I don't want to say that to a group that's concerned about invasives, and I'm sure we would all like to not have them all over things, but rather than just squash them, encourage kids to collect a few, put them in jars, see what they do, see if they can see the mouth parts feeding. So I never understand people not being interested in insects because I can't imagine anything more fun to look at with a kid. I have fed many butterflies with my nieces and my nephews, and every other child that comes my way. So ask me how to, some other time, how to feed a butterfly. That's a great way to get kids excited, or grown-ups excited about insects.
Well, as someone who's taken Linda's class, I watched her feed several different insects, and it is fascinating. But
Right.
moving on, Jacob, do you have a question that you can ask Linda from the audience?
Yep, and I'm actually, you've nailed off a couple, and this is back to the spotted lanternfly. But is there a chemical or something that we can coat egg masses with to prevent them from hatching, as opposed to just, trying to mechanically crush them?
Yeah, that's a good question, probably, and I don't know. Right, so to be able to paint them with something that would kill them off. I don't know.
Interesting. Okay, Lauren, do you have another
But I
Oh,
but I
okay.
did read most of the egg masses are more than 30 feet up in the air.
Oh, that
So
is
that's-
unfortunate.
So that, yes, so that is a problem.
Right. Lauren, do you have another question for us?
Yeah, going back to the conversation about monarchs, Veronica is asking, what are the bird predators of the monarchs and why is tropical milkweed not recommended? I read confusing info in the forums.
Yeah, so the tropical milkweed, so in Florida, the problem is the tropical milkweed persists year round, and therefore monarchs persist year round on those plants, and their enemies build up. So you can get buildup of populations of a problem called OE, Ophryocistus electroscura. In this area, the milkweed is going to die back in the fall. It's not terribly the same problem that it would be further in south. But in south, it's basically you want to use the native milkweeds rather than this introduced one, which has a different life cycle. But sorry, what was the first question about monarchs?
What are the bird predators of the monarchs?
So monarchs are chemically protected. The milkweeds have a group of plants called cardinalides, and the monarchs take this up as caterpillars and sequester it. So all the life stages of monarchs are noxious. Different milkweeds have different kinds of cardinalides. So you could look at two monarch butterflies. They look identical. One of them could be really nasty, would make anybody who ate it sick, might make them vomit. The other one might look identical, might have fed on a milkweed with very little cardinalide. It's perfectly okay to eat. So in Mexico, there are two species of birds that have figured out how to eat the monarchs. There's a grosbeak that is insensitive to these cardinalides, and there is an oriole that's figured out how to find the butterflies that have the lowest amount of cardinalide and eat the parts of the body that have the least. So those two have figured out ways to overcome this chemical defense. people will incidentally see, you may see a bird in your yard eating a monarch. Most of the monarchs here in Virginia have fed on Asclepius syriaca. They're not super, super toxic. So birds can find some individual monarchs that aren't particularly toxic.
Okay. So it's 1 o'clock right now. We still have so many questions. So, but I know that some people have really tight schedules, and we thank you so much for joining us. But if you can stay with us for a few more minutes, we're going to ask a few more questions of Linda while we've got her captive, and she can answer your questions. So I'm going to move on to Natalie to see if she's got another question for us.
This one. Just for fun, what roles do mosquitoes have in plants ecosystem?
In which ecosystems?
In plants ecosystem.
Boy, not, because the mosquitoes are aquatic as immatures and not, I would be an interesting challenge to see what the impacts would be. I can't think of interactions between mosquitoes and plants.
Another reason to swap them. Okay, Jacob, you're up.
Actually, that kind of raised a question on my own. Aren't the males pollinators, as they don't drink blood? I thought it was only the females that do for egg protein.
Right, the females are sucking blood. I don't know of any mosquitoes that are pollinators, and I don't even know if the adult males feed. Again, I'm not an applied entomologist. I'm sort of thinking they don't need the blood meal because they don't need the protein to make eggs. It's possible that as adults, the males don't feed at all, or maybe they're feeding on plant matter, but I doubt they're pollinating.
Good point. Homework to get into then. I see a couple
mosquito there is one mosquito that lives inside pitcher plants. So I guess that's an interaction between mosquitoes and plants.
Ooh, that is interesting.
The larvae develop in the water in the pitcher plant.
I do see two questions on one specifies, I believe, Chinese mantises, and another one is Asian praying mantises. Are they beneficial over here, as in preying on the spotted lanternfly?
Yes, right. So that person, whoever asked that question, was observant that this praying mantid in the right photo is not a native mantid. It is the Chinese mantid. But that's one of these cases where almost all the mantids you see in your yard are this species that has been in the United States. I don't know how long, I don't know when it got here or how long. Are these beneficial or harmful? They're major predators on all sorts of things. They're hardly ever abundant enough to really be a problem or a benefit. I mean, they're basically living their lives munching away on things that they find. You're not going to control your pests with them, and they're not going to make any endangered species go extinct. They're just here. They may be outcompeting some of the native mantids, possibly, and I don't know about that. So that could be a negative that I'd have to look up.
Okay. So I'm going to bring us home and ask you a question that I'm not sure you know the answer to, but I've wondered about this because they're kind of close to my heart. Those little solitary native bees, do you know if their populations are threatened at all by the European honeybee?
So we don't really know. At this point, we don't have good enough data sets on the native solitary bees to know what their population trends are. We have better knowledge of the trends of bumblebees and other social insects.
Okay.
So
more research is needed.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. And Rowena, I need to give one more reason for why people should be excited about spotted lanternflies and show them to their kids. And it'll only take 30 seconds at the very beginning, I showed you this weird lantern bug, which is also now called a lanternfly. This is in the same family as the spotted lanternfly. It's a family of bizarre insects. Look at all these insects that are related to the spotted lanternfly. And I just think you should say, wow, that's cool. And that's the last thing I want to say.
We would say, wow, that's cool. And then let's go ahead and control some Atlantis of heaven. So try to protect the grapes. But those are really cool looking bugs or insects. Thank you.
And they're
All right,
actually
you
bugs
can-
also. They are bugs.
Yeah. So if you could stop sharing right now, then I will share, Linda.
Sure.
One final thing. And we just did our Q&A. I want to thank you for joining us. We apologize for going over just a little bit with the Q&A section, but it was so fascinating to have all of these different questions about this is really a huge area of study. And Linda, you are so knowledgeable that you were able to answer almost all of those questions. I can't imagine knowing so much about that. If you have any more questions for Linda, feel free to email me, rowena@blueridgeprism.org, and I'm happy to get them to her. And if you have any more information you'd like to learn about Blue Ridge Prism and our events and what we do, please visit us at our website, www.blueridgeprism.org. I am going to reiterate what Rod said earlier, that we can't do any of our work without you. And donations are always welcome. If you would like us to help us out to continue our work, to help save native plants and preserve our natural environment for future generations, we thank you so much for considering that. And follow us on social media. We are always posting and telling you what's up with us. And once again, you can contact me at rowena@blueridgeprism.org. Or if you want to volunteer or have more general questions, go ahead and email us at info@blueridgeprism.org. Just a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be emailed to you in a few days. So don't worry if you weren't able to catch the beginning or you had to leave early. You will get a copy of this webinar if you registered. So sit tight, and I'll be emailing you in a few days. That's it. Thank you so much for joining us. Once you exit out of here, a short survey is going to pop up, and we'd love for you to answer that because we're always looking to see how we can improve these presentations and the different subject areas that we can explore with you. So thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you to Rod and Lauren and Natalie and Jacob for helping out and with today's presentation. And most of all, thank you so much, Linda. We really enjoyed having you with us today. And thank you to our audience for all your great questions and for all your interest. Have a great rest of your month. It's a beautiful day outside, so I hope you get outside. Take care.